So now to our keynote speaker, her name is Bukola. She's passionate about building technology that improves access to knowledge and well-being. She's currently the founder and CEO of FoW School, a new online university providing affordable degrees for emerging markets, starting with sub-Saharan Africa. The FoW model combines the flexibility of self-paced learning with the community of peers and industry mentors. Previously, she was at Google, where she led the product team for Google Classroom, the flagship software products for K-12 teachers and learners. She led the development and growth of Classroom, bringing the product to over 40 million plus monthly users. Prior to Google, she was a product manager at Amplify Education, and which founded an edtech company and managed partnerships with at CK12 Foundation, a provider of open source digital textbooks. She's the founding board chair of Black Hat Futures Fund, which funds emerging arts organizations that promote and preserve Black art and culture. So you can see that we have brought someone that is very versatile in the field, and she's going to be sharing from her experience, her work, and we're looking forward to the nuggets and the insights from this keynote address. So Okwe, you're most welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Bukola. And can everybody hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. So let me go ahead. Thank you all. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And if you could just confirm to me when you're able to see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, you know, there's technology working for us, so that's good. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for that introduction. It's an honor to be here with you and discussing this topic that I'm very passionate about and just feels so very timely. You heard a little bit of the bio, but just to reiterate, my name is Okwe. I am currently the founder and CEO of FoW School. But when people ask me what I do, I usually tell them my current job, but I try to emphasize that that's just what I'm doing right now, and it's my current tour of duty. As we'll be discussing throughout this presentation, jobs and roles are constantly evolving. So when I first meet someone and they ask me what I do, I don't typically tell them my current role. Instead, I tell them what I like to describe as my mission, which is building technology that improves access to knowledge and well-being. And the reason I focus on this mission is, again, because the job or the way that mission is showing up at any given time might change very much. So before I get started, would love to hear a little bit more about those of you who are in the room. And I know we were starting to put in chat earlier, but if you could just take a minute, your name, your current role or your job, and then if you have it or you know it, maybe articulate what you think your larger mission is. Why are you here? What's the thing that you really want to accomplish beyond your current job? So I'll pause for a few minutes and let folks share that in the chat. Thank you all for sharing. So tell us where you're from, but also, you know, what you're currently doing and if you have a sense of it, what that larger mission is. So good to have you here, Jude. I see Peter joining us from Lagos, welcome. Anu from Kaduna, welcome. All right, thank you, Benga, who's really focused on helping people unlock their potential. Welcome. I'll give a few more seconds for other folks to add in. All right, so as you all feel free to continue introducing yourself and adding into the chat. So I loved the videos that we watched earlier today because the videos really illustrate something that is on all of our minds. You know, why are we here? We're here because we want to accelerate Africa's preparation for the changing world of work. So whenever I'm in conversations like these, conversations with fellow founders in education, we all have the sense that something is going to be different. Change is coming. I just finished a fellowship for startup founders. There were about 20 of us, and everybody was building a company for the future of learning and work. So there's this belief that the future of work is going to be vastly different from what it used to be in the past. For some of us, that makes us a bit anxious. But before talking about how things are changing, I think it's helpful to look back on the past and align on what exactly things used to be like and what we think is going to be different. So what was the past of learning and work? Back then, work was very industrial. We had standardized work. We also had standardized schools. So whether you were working in a factory or in an office, many roles looked pretty standard. What you did, where you went. And of course, in schools, you see this photo, it's old photo of a lecture hall from the turn of the century. But honestly, it doesn't look that different from, you know, the lecture halls that I was in, 14 years ago in university. We still sat in rows, and there was a professor or lecturer at the top or in the front of the classroom, and we took notes, on paper. Maybe today you take your notes on a laptop, but the point is the past was very standard and very industrial. And so what's coming up? What is the future going to look like? I always loved looking at this photo. When I was younger, one of my favorite television shows was a cartoon called The Jetsons. And it was meant to be a futuristic, this is what things are going to look like in the future. And the main thing that I remember about The Jetsons is everybody had flying cars. And I thought that was so exciting. So the thing that was interesting about their vision of the future is most things actually look the same. People still went to jobs that looked the same, families looked the same, the environment looked the same, but they had really cool and exciting technology like flying cars. And that was a vision of the future that was pretty exciting, didn't really bring up anything too scary. But when I think about the future today, and one of the folks in the videos we saw mention this, today we think about the future and worry about, the robots who are going to replace us, right? You see this robot playing a piano. There was a bit of time when we thought, okay, robots will do the things we don't like to do. I would be happy for a robot to sweep my house because I don't like to do that anyway. So if a robot wants to take the chores that I don't want to do, that's fine. But what if there's a robot that can do advanced work, that can play the piano, that can caregive? Those are the types of things that starts to give us a bit more anxiety around the future of work. Are these robots going to replace us? I believe that the answer is no, but we do have to be prepared for the changes that are coming. So in order to prepare for a future that is marked by rapid technology change, we really need education models that prepare us to adapt, to pick up new skills, and to work across barriers. So I want to talk about each of these changes together and then consider what we think the implications are for us as individuals, but also for policymakers and our society at large. And I'm going to talk about three things that I think are driving the future of work. One is the rapid pace of change in jobs and types of work. Two is decentralization of the employer-employee relationship. And three is globalization of work. And even though I'm saying these are the things that are in the future, the reality is that they're happening already. So the future is here. These changes are happening. They're getting faster, but they're already happening, and we need to be prepared for them right now. And so the first change is this idea of work being very fast changing. And what I mean by that is that jobs are being invented and reinvented at a rapid pace. And when I was getting ready for this talk, I looked back at my own career and started to reflect a little bit. So I'm going to show you a little bit of, my CV, if you will. So when I was in secondary school, like, year 2000, early 2000s, I watched a lot of television. We watched a lot of the news, CNN in our house. And so I wanted to be a journalist. If my mom or dad asked, I would tell them that, of course, I wanted to be a doctor. But really, on the inside, I wanted to be a journalist. So I went off to university. And when I was at university, I started thinking more about the things I cared about, and especially about economic development, about Nigeria, about Africa. And I decided that actually I wanted to become an economist, because that's who I saw around me who seemed to be doing work to address economic development. So graduated in 2007, and in the intervening almost 15 years since, I have developed this professional mission that has led to many different jobs. And in fact, the primary job that I've held, which is product management, wasn't even something that I knew existed in 2000. I had no idea what product management was. And now it's one of the most impactful roles or jobs in technology organizations. So when I left university, I thought, okay, before going back to the master's or the PhD, let me understand a little bit more about business, about economics, about development. And I discovered something called consulting. Again, I didn't know this job existed in 2008, but I became a management consultant working on business and strategy projects for businesses, for NGOs. And it was really a great way to understand business. Then I went back to school. And as I was studying during my master's program, I discovered or learned about ed tech. It was because I started to see these new companies pop up. One that really impacted me was Khan Academy, where you could go online and this guy was just recording videos of himself. I think he was tutoring his cousin or something, doing all these math problems, and people from all over the world were watching it and they were learning. And I think it was 2009 or 2010 when Khan Academy started. And a light bulb just went off in my head. Wow, why spend all this time, get a PhD, write papers that maybe people will read what they won't read? This guy, Sal Khan, he's making a difference. By using this internet, this technology thing, he's actually educating people from all over the world. So I got very excited about ed tech and decided that's what I'm gonna do now. And at the time I was living in New York, I moved to California because that's where all the tech companies were. And I started working at a company called CK12 Foundation. And first I started working in partnerships and business development because that was what I did in consulting. And then I discovered product management. So a product manager, for those who aren't familiar with that role, is a role that exists in technology companies. And when you're building software or you're building technology, you need somebody who can sit at the intersection of what your business needs. So the business needs building a sustainable company, the technology, so somebody who understands software, understands coding, can work day to day with the developers and the designers, and then the users, someone who's going to really understand your user. And when I started in product management, you just kind of, companies were just figuring out what PMs did. And so you just made your way into it one way or the other. By the time I left Google, we were hiring people straight from university to become associate or junior product managers. The industry had grown rapidly. And now I'm constantly being approached by people who want to become product managers. And again, this was a job that that didn't really exist fully in 2007, and I certainly had never heard of. And so even looking at my own career, it's been an example of new jobs being created, new jobs being invented and being reinvented. Let me pause for a second and maybe ask you all in chat, maybe you could share what's the most interesting job that you've had so far, if anybody wants to be brave enough to share.
Feel free to unmute yourself, anyone that would like to share.
Thank you. Yes, you don't. So if you don't want to chat, please. We have a relatively small group, so jump in. And I'm gonna wait until somebody shares. So.
Yeah, I think for me, my most exciting job is working with. So the work I do, I work as a development consultant. So in the area of the work I do, it's tied to education. So I work with UN peacekeepers. So I design a curriculum for them to help them engage with community in a more productive way. Because when people hear about UN peacekeepers, what comes to your head is about the military guys going to shoot people and kill them. But so nobody thinks of awesome things they do, because they sometimes they are
bullets,
so they are made to do a lot of work around. They become the economist, the doctor, the person that provide all of the support system, because they are non-existent because of conflict. So helping those set of people understand how to engage community, how to interact with their own biases, and also how to even look beyond the tactical training they've been given as personnel, for me, it's fulfilling. It's also helping them to see the other part of their mission, that they can contribute to build a healthy and resilient community by the time they leave the places. So for me.
Thank you for sharing that, Benga. That's such an interesting role, right? Because it's part consultant, part teacher. I would even say maybe part psychologist, in terms of what you were saying about helping people examine their own bias, right? So there's probably not one good phrase that describes it fully, but that's a really interesting role. If anyone else wants to jump in, feel free. Okay. Well, there'll be more opportunities in a minute, but when I think about this kind of general idea of the ways that jobs are changing and being reinvented, this statistic came to mind. So this was shared in a report in 2018, and it said 85% of 2030 jobs hadn't been invented yet. And when I first saw this report, and it made the rounds on Twitter, and a lot of people were debating it, to me, initially it seemed just implausible. There's no way that 85% of jobs hadn't been invented, that would be around in 15 years, hadn't been invented. I thought to myself, even if it was only 50%, that still seems like way too big. So I started thinking about it a little bit. If you think about it, when I was leaving university 15 years ago, roughly 15 years ago, what were some of the jobs that existed that either are no longer here or they're disappearing, right? So remember that we used to have people who repaired our VCRs. Like, we had a VCR in my house growing up. Some of you on the call, depending on your age, might not even know what a VCR is, but That's a job that no longer exists. Or I think about telemarketers, telemarketers who call you, try to sell you these things. They still exist to some extent, but those jobs are going away rapidly, as now, instead of telemarketers, companies and people who are trying to sell to you are using Facebook ads and Instagram ads. So yeah, there are in fact jobs that were here not too long ago, I can remember vividly, and they no longer are here. At the same time, I think about many jobs that I personally know people who do today that didn't exist when we left university, like a blockchain engineer. We didn't have the blockchain in 2006, 2007, right? Or I saw a study recently that was asking kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the number one was actually a YouTuber. And first I laughed, and then I thought, actually, there are thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people, who are making a good living from YouTube. The whole creator economy. I have a good friend who now her full-time job is writing a phenomenal newsletter through Substack, and people pay her, I think like $80 a year or something to subscribe to this newsletter, and that's her full-time job. She's got thousands of subscribers. Or media manager. I was just talking to a friend about trying to hire a social media manager for her company. That didn't used to be a job. Now that's a very popular job. So again, you can see all these new industries that are here that didn't used to be here. And then thinking a little bit further out, what are the trends that are emerging, right? We're all talking about climate change. It's probably going to be a lot of jobs in climate change. Or, there's a big trend now in some parts of the world, at least towards fake meat. Maybe you'll end up being somebody who is a farmer, but you're creating cultured meats or other alternative types of meat. Or when we have all the drones delivering things, someone's going to have to manage the drones. The point is, jobs, one of the big trends that's driving the future of work is just this notion that jobs are going to get invented and reinvented much faster than we've seen. The second trend that I think about is this notion of decentralization, meaning in our careers, we not only will have many jobs, we're also going to have at the same time jobs with many employers. I'm sure some of you have seen this term, gig economy, right? People are doing gigs instead of staying with one employer. I think a lot about my father, who he is a pharmacist, or he was a pharmacist before he retired, and he worked for the same company for 20 plus years, which is so unusual today, right? People switch jobs, they switch employers. And in fact, more and more people don't want one employer. They don't want to be tied to one company. So they're doing projects in the gig economy. And even in my own experience, although I've had a lot of employers, I've also almost always maintained many gigs. So when I was in university and high school, I was a tutor. When I was working on my first startup, I was also helping a tech company manage their events. When I was at Google and I was a product manager, I was also a coding instructor at a local college because I really love teaching and I love helping people pick up tech skills. And even now, as we're working on Kibo, I occasionally will be a consultant to other startups or companies that want guidance on product management. The point is, in the future, we're all going to take the various skills that we have and monetize them, not necessarily through one employer. I saw a stat that 36% of people, this is just for Americans, but I think this trend is global, freelance full-time. And more people are choosing to become full-time freelancers because they want the flexibility and autonomy. In some ways, African economies were maybe a little ahead of this because informal work is such a big part of our cultures naturally. So decentralization is going to be another trend. The last trend that I think is really driving this future of work is globalization. opportunities are going to be global. You'll be able to work anywhere, but also the competition will be global. So instead of just competing against people in your local environment or your region, we're looking out at global competition. And again, coming back to my own experience, I think about the teams that I've been on. You know, spent 4 years at Google, and I was based in New York, but I worked almost daily with people in California, in Hyderabad, in India, and in Zurich. It was just a very global company because we were building products that people were using all over the world. The company that I was working on a year ago that evolved into Kibo, I was in Lagos, I was in New York, most of the team was in Lagos. Now our team in Kibo, we're everywhere. We have folks in New York, in Lagos, in Dubai, in Doha, in Toronto. What matters for us isn't where you are, it's finding people who care about our mission, who are talented, and who can get the job done wherever they are in the world. So globalization is going to be another really big trend that impacts the future of work and for which we all have to be prepared. So now that I've kind of shown you the 3 trends that I believe are really driving the future, I want to move on to the next part where we talk about the implications. Now what? So what? Given that jobs are changing fast, that work is becoming decentralized and global, what does that mean for us and how we do education especially? So I'm just going to pose this question and would love for us to pause and just have a brief conversation. So if you could change one thing, you can do more than one if you want, but at least one thing about education in Africa to adapt to the future of work, what would it be? What do we need to do to adapt for these changes in globalization, decentralization, and rapid work shifts? Would love for a few people to share their thoughts.
I'm Ajit. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So you may have gone back on mute because we can't hear you now, but feel free to unmute.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. For me, if there's anything to change, I would say bringing technology into the classroom and also making it part of the teaching and learning process, starting from the basic education. Because if people are moving from, let's say, senior secondary school or high school, they are either going to a tertiary institution or they are going into the labor market. So if they are used to technology while teaching and learning process is actually going on, it will be easy to transit into the future of work, which you have also talked about, that is always changing rapidly and also having a global outlook. So we need to start preparing our young people into that world. Not we are going to go in now, we are already in it. So for me, that's my own thought. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I completely agree. We can't, technology, every job is a technology job. And so we have to integrate that into the education process, like you said. And I think somebody else said it on chat. It's, you know, how do we make computer proficiency part of the teacher training curriculum? Any other thoughts? If anybody else wants to unmute.
There's a hand up. Modukwe. I think Modukwe Yinka, you can speak.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you for this, putting this together. Whilst I agree that we are in the technology generation and technology is important, I am an educator and I teach primary school. Now, when this question speaks to the vast number of children that are underserved and are out of school. And the reason why we have that vast number is because they're not even literate. So I think we have to start with literacy, and we can use technology to teach literacy. And having done that, then we can begin to talk about using technology to expand their knowledge in the classroom. Secondly, I do work with groups that work with teachers in the underserved communities who work in the low-income primary schools, and they have no idea of how to boot a computer. So if we talk about technology being the first stage, putting computers, I think that, you know, yes, we will speak to a certain demography, the children who are in the more elitist primary schools, but we won't be addressing the problem of Africa. So I think we should look closely at Africa from the two schools. We have the private schools, which are more elitist, but the number of children in them are a lot smaller than the larger number of children that are out of school and want to go to school. I've engaged children in IDP camps. They want to go to school. It's just that there's no way of teaching them. So that would be my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Medica, and I agree. You have to, we can't do, I think technology is part of the solution, but it's not the entire solution. And without that basic foundation of literacy, as you were saying, tech can't or won't work. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, there's Amarachi Kalu. Amarachi, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you very much. As much as I agree with what Medica just raised, but I feel there is a need to start moving towards that adoption of technology. That is why it needs to be systemized. By that, when the government sees that that's the way we need to go, short on the staff communities, there should be a plan to meet such people. So the technology we're talking about, yes, it looks as if it's for the elite schools, but not necessarily. The idea is not even for them. For me, I feel the idea is to make education accessible to the underserved community. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And yes, and you know, when we talk about technology broadly, there's so many ways to think about it, right? You know, in terms of even the delivery platforms and how can we be using the tech that people have, even in the lower income communities, to reach them. So
You still have room for one more. There's a hand up, Anu. So maybe we'll take Anu before. Anu?
Okay, thank you. I really think there's a disconnect between the classrooms and the industry. So I think we would have to bridge that disconnect and maybe improve our curriculums to suit the industries. And then we'll also need to build that bridge because we keep having unemployable graduates, which is
Anu, are you still there? So Anu, I think you were breaking up a little bit, but what I heard, and I completely agree with you on, is this need to retool the curriculum for what industry needs and to address the fact that we still have this problem of even when people are able to get through the education system, they're unemployable because they don't have the most relevant skills. And I think that's very important. And I love this last point that was just added in the chat. So I can't see the hand raised, but if you want to unmute yourself, Ibuku, and talk to us more, that would be great.
All right, so I'm Bukola. I talked about adding inclusiveness and, you know, proper communication in the classroom. We should be able to speak to the heart of our students. And I mean, there's a lot of potential in Africa, but by virtue of the way the classroom is, we are tailored towards just one way. By virtue of more emphasis on exams as a means of testing, we are tailored to one way. So we should look at all students. We should include everyone as a way, because there's potential in every child, regardless of whether they can get multiple A's. So it's something that I think we should begin to look into, especially in Africa. Thanks.
Absolutely. And thank you for contributing that. I couldn't agree more. We have to, and I'll be talking about this next as we think about the implications, is we have to rethink how we assess students. And many of our traditional assessments, they don't work, right? The curriculum, as Anu was suggesting, isn't tailored for today's industry. And if we were to tailor it for today's industry, communication, which you brought up, Bukola, would be vastly more important than most of the things that we're testing for today. You all have already kind of jumped into many of the things I want to talk about, but for me, it's always important to say, why is this topic interesting? Why is this topic worthy of our time? Why should we be thinking so much about education in Africa? Yes, we're Africans, but it's not just about Africa, it's really about the world, right? We are the only region in the world where the youth population is increasing. I know that there's a lot of debate about our statistics, but some suggest that Nigeria will be 400 million people in 2 decades or so. So making sure that Africa and African education is prepared for the future isn't just for Africa, it's for the entire world, because the future is African. And so as I think about this preparation, it's many of the things you all have brought up, but I boil it down maybe to three big areas. One is choosing competency over content in education. 2 is embracing lifelong learning. And then 3rd is building that global network. On this question of competency, and to be honest, I don't think this is just an African problem. This is a problem everywhere. But the reality is that education is still, and I think Bukola, you were making this point, the thing that is prized or rewarded right now is still mostly rote memorization and fixed problem solving, right? So, I'm the teacher, I'm gonna solve this math problem, and then I'm gonna give all of you 20 problems that look exactly the same to solve, right? That's, I'm sure everybody here has done that exercise. And that unfortunately is still the big model for education, where instead of that kind of thing, we need to be teaching students to synthesize and apply information. I'm not saying content is unimportant. However, you can go on Google and get any answer to any question, right? So it's not about just putting content into the minds of young people. It's about helping them to develop competencies and skills that really matter, skills that industry is really looking for, like Anu says. And so if you think about what are these, so-called 21st century skills, right? Critical thinking, very, very important. How are we educating to do critical thinking? Taking a problem and then just doing 20 problems that look exactly the same, that doesn't help you to do complex thinking. How are we educating for communication? If every job is going to be virtual and global, your communication and collaboration skills become paramount. I'll tell you, as somebody who worked in one of the best tech companies in the world, the problems that we faced were primarily not technical problems. They were people problems, right? How do we make sure people are working effectively and coming to alignment and driving towards the same goal? Those are the competencies that were really key. And then it is true that every job will involve a lot of technology. So to some of the things that we were saying earlier, there are baseline technical skills that we have to make sure that all students have. And so as we think about prizing competency over content, we have to look at alternate models. So we have to look at things like skills boot camps. You know, Staring for Greatness is an example of this. How do we create programs that are short and really drive students into specific skills? We have to think about outside of school. Unfortunately, schools can be slow to change. So we have to bring many of these things outside of schools. But I'm still a believer in changing school itself and really thinking about new school models, because school is where everywhere in the world students spend and get a big chunk of their learning. So we can't say, all right, we'll let the schools continue being ineffective and we'll just work around it. We have to create new school models. There are a bunch of school models that I'm really excited about and that I think are interesting. So Valenture Institute, for example, they're based in South Africa. It's an online high school that's really building this sort of global online experience for students. Kadato was started in Kenya during COVID by a parent who wanted to provide better virtual opportunities. And so now this platform for young kids, they can take coding classes, they can take speech and debate classes, they can take chess, and do it all in a live online experience with African teachers. You know, we're working on Kibo, where we are reinventing online universities for students in Africa and across the continent. You have folks like Moringa, which is, you know, an alternate to university. It's a coding boot camp. So we are so early in this period and this environment. So I'm very excited, very bullish about opportunities for education entrepreneurs. I know many of you on the call are currently, you know, entrepreneurs, whether for social or for-profit enterprises, are thinking about it. I think there's never been a better time to think about building new models for Africa, whether they're in school, out of school, online, offline, hybrid. We need a lot of solutions and we need them quickly. And what these solutions must do is be focused on building those competencies and skills, and less so on just content. The second thing I think we need to do to prepare for the future of work is to embrace lifelong learning. Like we were talking about earlier, jobs are going to change. There are jobs coming that we don't know about, and the jobs that we feel good and confident about today might not be here in 10 years. So that means that we each have to be excited about what's coming. That means we have to be learning about and educating ourselves on emerging jobs and emerging trends. You know, even if you think this cryptocurrency thing is dumb, you should probably learn about the blockchain. And what are people talking about again? What is that? So we need to be thinking about emerging trends. We need to be able to demonstrate and build new skills. When I'm interviewing people for a job, I always ask the question, what's something that you've learned recently? If someone can't tell me something that they've learned recently, we're not going to work well together because I'm constantly going to be asking you to learn new things. We're bringing somebody onto our team, and one of the first things she's going to have to learn is no-code automation. That's becoming a big trend. And this person is she's not a developer, but I believe that because she's demonstrated in other ways that she is a lifelong learner, she'll be able to pick it up. So you yourself, whether you are an educator or a learner, we should all be learners. And you should be thinking to yourself, how am I modeling that growth and lifelong learning? And then part of that is being comfortable with failure. We're African, we don't like failure, but there's no way to be a true lifelong learner without experiencing some failure. And so whether as a stakeholder, a parent, a family member, we have to start talking differently about things that you try and don't work out in order to prepare for the future. And then lastly, we must build a global network. We no longer live in silos. And so we need to embrace global learning and remove barriers to global learning. I think the barriers, this is really a place where stakeholders can do the most good. When I think about the barriers to global learning, a really big one, of course, is infrastructure. Without adequate broadband, adequate power, you can't participate well in global learning. So how can stakeholders and those who are able to do that, how can we be providing better infrastructure? How can we think about learning centers and places where even if you don't maybe have the broadband at home, you can go and have access to? There's also a bunch of regulatory barriers. We need to make it easier to transfer credentials across countries and across regions. Every single country has its own university commission, university accreditation process. Why should that be when we live in a global world? So removing barriers to global learning, joining your own online learning communities. Ask yourself, who am I learning from? Who are my professional mentors? If they all are in the same country or the same region, you've got to change that. And one great way to change that is through global education programs. Secondary schools for young people, camps, boot camps, universities, professional development. It's never been easier to build an online network, and that's going to be really necessary as the future of work changes. So in summary, I believe that the future of work is fast changing with rapid changes in jobs, decentralized and global. And to make sure that Africa is ready, we have to embrace alternative education models that are more focused on skill building and less focused on just memorizing content. Education models that encourage students to learn new things constantly, even if that means that they will sometimes fail or experience setbacks. And education models that encourage students to build a global network. And if we can do all of these things, I'm an optimist. I believe that the future will be very, very bright. That's everything I have for you all. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to open it up now for Q&A and discussion. And I'll let Bukola make sure that we stay on time.
Great, thank